Hello, my name is Rob and welcome to SwiftSlots. Now I have a lot of conversations with people and it goes something like this. Rob, I absolutely love your MDF tracks. Oh, I wish I could make one. And then I say, well, you can. And they say, oh no, I can't. Cue all the excuses. Yawn, 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 and I've heard it all before. And I get it in the chats below, I get it to my friends face to face at the club, I even get it with creators on the phone, and you know who you are. So in this video, what I want to do is I want to take you step by step in every little detail on how to get a slot into an MDF board. And trust me, it really isn't difficult. And all you need is a tiny little speck of motivation, and you can absolutely put a slot in a piece of MDF and create your own MDF track. So in this video, I'm going to take you step by step on how to do it exactly on a little tiny test board. And then once I've done all of that and shown you exactly how to do it, I'm then going to take my test board to the next level and decorate it. And then at the end of this video, I'm actually going to be offering these little boards for sale with the back scenes as well, if you should want to buy one. But I severely hope that at the end of this video, any of you guys that thought you might want to make an MDF track but hit me with that wave of negativity on the phone or face to face, you will actually go, yeah Rob, I can do that, I will do that. So this is the board that I've got to actually do it with, and it is literally this size here. And in case it's not coming across on the camera, it's 2.5 foot long by 18 inches wide, which is 30 inches by 18, which is 760 mil, which is 460 mil. And that is it. That is going to be our MDF routed track. And it's 9 mil thick MDF. Now this particular video is literally only going to be a very simple figure of 8. Not exciting, I know, but it's a tiny little board. I had thought about making this as a 2x1, but 2x1 just is a little bit squeezy, and I want to be able to get the cars to do a nice little drift on the end. So that extra 6 inches overall just allows me to sort of swing the back end out. So that's what I'm going to do, because a lot of you guys, one of the other wave of criticisms you say that I can't do an MDF track, was the size. I've got nowhere to put it. Well, this is only 2.5 foot long by 18 inches deep. Everybody, even the guys in Japan who are living in a little micro flat, have got a room for that. Not a problem at all. So let's get you on my workbench and I'll show you exactly the tools that you need to create a slot, and then we'll actually create a slot in this board using only 2 very basic methods of routing. And with those 2 basic methods of routing, you could expand this idea as big or as small as you want, and you could even reduce this board down to almost a foot square, because slot cars will actually go around a 6-inch radius with a little bit of speed. Crow Valley has 5 6-inch radius bends, and we all know how well that track runs. So you can absolutely have a micro layout. You can make it as complicated as you want or as easy as you want, big or as small as you want, just by using these 2 very basic techniques. So let's get to my workbench, let's show you those techniques and get this board into a slot car track. Okay, so I'm not going to address basic hand tools, but what I will address are the 2 tools that you may not have. First being a router, and then if you don't have a router, you're undoubtedly not going to have the router bit. So this is my 30-year-old 1/4-inch shank Elu. It's done many jobs and it served me well. So this is all you actually need to make a slotted routed track, and obviously the cutter to go with it. So this 1/4-inch router refers to the collet that's actually inside the actual spindle. So this is a 1/4-inch collet to take 1/4-inch bits, and that's all you need. There are bigger routers available up to 1/2 inch and probably bigger, but they tend to be a little bit more bulky. A 1/4-inch router is all you need. So if you want to buy a router to route your own tracks, buy a 1/4-inch, or if you can borrow one or hire one, 1/4-inch is all you need. But if you have to get a bigger one, then fine, but they're a little bit bulky. So 1/4-inch or 6 mil, I think there's a modern version now of a 6 mil, but 6 mil, 1/4-inch, they're similar, but that's all you need, 6 mil or 1/4-inch. So this particular router has got a set of depth stops just here. Now, because it's 30 years old, they're all different screws of all different types, but they all do the same job. And then we've got an adjustable depth stop here, which is now just a piece of bar because the original bar is long since gone. So basically all you do is on this particular router, I can set up my first depth stop there, and that will be my first cut once I've got the cutter in and set it up. So that would be my first 3mm cut. Then once I've cut that, I shall turn it round to the next index and then slacken it down, and then that will give me my second cut at 6mm, and then my next depth stop will be there, which will be a 9mm cut. Now this MDF here is actually 9mm, and I don't intend to run full wood guides at 9mm on this track, so I'm going to set that last depth stop to 7.5mm, just a case of undoing the thread and adjusting it. I can also undo this knob here and adjust the main thread as well, just to sort of whatever, but it's now set up to do that. So that's really all the router is about. It's just the depth stops and the size of shank. So the other thing that you're going to notice with a router is the end plate here. Now it's not radiused here just for fun. That radius there is exactly radiating around the center of the chuck, of the collet. So you can run off of either of those two edges on a flat edge, and it will be perfectly good no matter what part of the router you use. It'll still run center to the cutter. And then these flats are exactly as they are, flats, so you'd run across a flat section on that flat if that's what you need to do. But I would suggest when you're running, making a slotted track, use these rounded edges here. Then you don't need to do anything else other than those. So the other thing you'll notice is I've got a fence here, and that fence simply goes into the router like this, if I can get it in there, like that. Now all routers come with these fences. She wants to be a bit stiff at the moment, but never mind, you get the idea. But we're not going to use this fence on this track. What we are going to use, gosh, she is stiff. What we are going to use is one of these bars. So this is the bar that we're interested in. So it's a piece of the fence, and you'll notice that I've drilled a hole in the end of it. So what we're going to do is we're simply going to pop that in there, and we can do up that there, and that locks the bar in place. So what we'll do is when we know what our radius is, or our center to our circle, our bend, I'm going to drill a hole, and I'm going to put a screw through that, a nice tight fitting screw through this bar and through the wood, and then we'll use that as a pivot. So that will give us all of our bends, and all we do is we slacken off that nut there, and we can move the router anywhere along that bar, lock it off, and then we can swing an arc. And that is really all we need to do. Super easy. Anybody can run a radius just by screwing it in the screw there and turning the router. Really, really easy. Right, so the next thing that you're obviously going to need to make a routed track is a cutter. Now these come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but the size that you want for a slot car track is going to be 3mm or 3.2mm. 3.2mm is more common, but 3mm is out there as well. So, and also what I would recommend is to buy a single flute cutter. So it's just got one cutting face. And the reason for that is it has the most amount of meat on the shaft. I've used double flutes before, and if you push a bit too hard or go a bit too quick, they could snap off because there's not as much material on that shaft. Being such a small cutter, you want it to be as strong as possible. So I would go for a single flute cutter. That's all you need to do. And although sometimes in the comments I've read, well, you can take a pass in one go and use the full depth of the cutter, I wouldn't. I would only go down 3mm at a time. There's no need to be greedy. It's not a race. We've got all day, and it takes the strain off the cutter. So that's the cutter. In this particular case is a 1/4 inch shank, which is this piece here, and that goes into our 1/4 inch router just like that, no problems at all. And that is the cutter all done and dusted. Now these cutters can be expensive or they can be cheap. I've tried a cheap cutter. It cost me £3 on eBay, and it lasted me exactly 3 feet, and then it snapped. Waste of time. This particular cutter here cost me about £15, so what, about $17, and you can get them up to about £25 or sort of $28, $30, and they're obviously better. But this particular cutter has routed 5 slot car tracks, and some of them were quite big, and it's still got it. It's still going strong. And all I've done is I've tickled it once across the green wheel just to give it a sharpen up after the 4th track. And that's still going strong. And this was £15 or about $17. So that's all you need. It's just a straight cutter, 3mm or 3.2 on the shank that matches your router. In this case, 1/4 inch on a 1/4 inch. Okay, so back to my normal modeling bench because I want to get some close-up detail of my router. So get your router bit and pop it into your router collet like that. Put it in a decent depth because you don't want it sliding out, and do up your collet nice and tight like that. Right, so next get your gauge or a tape measure, gauge is better, and go down to the depth you want. So in our case it's 7.5mm because we're going to be running 7mm guides, and then mark that off on a piece of paper just about there. So that is now our depth. So then slacken off your router and bring the cutter in to what you think might be 7.5mm. Bring up your piece of paper and there you go, absolutely bang on. Almost. Now I think I want to come down just a hair more than that, so probably about there. Let's try that. There we are, absolutely spot on. So that is our maximum depth. Now I've already preset these depth adjusters here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it to my deepest setting, which is this one at the back, and now I'm going to bring my depth bar to it and then nip it up nice and tight. And that should now, when I bring that down and touch it, that should now bring that cutter, and it does look exactly to the right size. And that is it. Now, because I've already used this router for slot car tracks, all these other settings here are shallower than that, and they go up in 3mm increments. So my very first cut will be on my deepest gauge, which is this one here. So as I bring that down, touch that onto there, you will see that the cutter comes in at about 2 to 3mm. Because it's set for 9mm, it'll be a bit shallower than 3mm, so it's there. So then the next cut, we round to there, bring it down, and you can see it's a little bit closer, and then bring it round to our deepest one, bring the router in, lock it off, and there we are, we're back to the 7mm. And that is it. So that is now all completely set up to route a slot car track to a depth of 7.5mm. And that is all you need to do for the router. The rest of the work is now over on the main board. So let's go over there and start marking out the main board. Okay, so I've opened the camera up now so we can get a good view of the track. So we now need to mark the track. So for this, all you need is a straightforward ruler and a compass. Now this is a particularly huge one that I've made for making great big bends on great big tracks. And all it is just 2 lumps of wood, a slot cut out with a pencil glued in it, and a screw with a point ground onto it, and a nut and bolt and a wing nut. Now this is a little bit excessive for this particular track, but what I like about this one is it locks into place. All you really need, if you're not making bends that are too big, is a simple compass like this, and this particular one's got a little arm so you can go out and mark it off like that. This would be ideal for this size because I'm only going to do a 7-inch radius curve. So that will be fine. Sorry, 3.5-inch radius curve. So this would be fine. But I'm going to use my big one because I like to use my big one, so to speak. So what we now need to do is we now need to work out exactly where the slot is going to go on the board. And this is all down to you. You could make this board as complicated as you wanted to or as easy as you wanted to. And in this video, I only want to show you how to do a simple curve and a simple straight, and that's why I'm only going to do a figure of 8. I was tempted to do more things on this board, but I've got to keep in mind that this is for the beginners and I want to make this as easy as possible. So we're going to do 2 simple radiuses and 2 simple straights to create a figure of 8. So how do we do that? Well, what you do is you take your longest car. Now this isn't my longest car, but it's a particularly beautiful Scalextric Jaguar. Very, very nice. But what it is quite long, so that's ideal because I want to do 2 drifting bends and then obviously 2 connecting straights. So I'm going to take this car and I'm going to use this car to work out how far out I want to be drifting. Now I've already done a little bit of preliminary measurements on this board, so I know what I want. So basically what I need to do is I'm going to half this board. It's 18 inches at the moment, and I'm going to make it, going to mark my 9-inch there. Now I want the bends to be even, so I'm going to mark 9 inches in this direction here. So that's going to put me right there. So that's 9 inches across the board and then 9 inches in. And then I want to do that exactly the same for the other side. Now again, your mileage will definitely vary depending on the type of track that you want, depending on how complicated you want it. But just for the benefits of this video, I'm going to make it nice and simple. So there are my 2 points. Now, as I said before, I want to do a 7-inch radius bend. Sorry, a 3.5-inch radius, 7-inch diameter. So there's my 3.5. I'm going to mark it to there. And then I'm going to actually take the car and double check where the guide is. I'm going to put the guide on that mark. And then I'm going to pivot the car around that guide and see where my back end is at the sort of maximum angle on the mark. And there we are, that is it. So in theory, on maximum drift, I'm just about missing or potentially clipping the scenery, but that's maximum drift. And this is, like I say, almost my longest car. Most of my other cars are shorter than this, 1 or 2 longer, but this is the average longest car. So that'll be absolutely fine for the majority of cars. So I've got my 2 points for my radiuses there. So the next job is to actually mark those radiuses out. So what I'm going to do is just set up my compass. So this particular step isn't wildly necessary, but it does give you an idea of what your bends are going to look like. So then we just strike an arc around like this and overshoot where you want to go. I'm going to draw all around there like that. Now the main thing to do here is to actually dig that little spot so it's a proper little divot, and then do the same on this side here. Again, nice, give it a good old push to make sure you got a good mark there, and then you want to come overshoot where you want to be and then draw your arc all the way around there like that. And then, because this is going to be a figure of 8, you put your rule so that it just touches the edge of that circle, and you bring it round and you can just see the circle disappearing there, and bring it back over here and reposition it, and then bring it back over there and reposition it until you can just skim the edges of those circles and draw a line. And exactly the same over this side here. I'm a bit short on that bend there. Now because I pushed a really tight hole, I got a nice good register, so I can go back in and I can just continue that arc across just for fun. We'll do this side as well just to make sure. There we go. And then exactly the same for this one here. Just kiss the edge of the circle, kiss the edge of the circle, and this will be the same for every single bend you want to bring a straight from. You just kiss the edge of the circle and take the line to where you need to go. In this case it's the other circle. And there we are. So now we've got a figure of 8 marked. So next what you want to do is draw a straight line where those 2 lines intersect. So the edge of the circle and the straight. Draw a nice straight line right across that intersection point there, which is going to be somewhere about there. So now what we've got a straight with a start and a stop, and a straight with a start and a stop, and we got our circles here. So what you can do is double check with your car, because you can see the line. So you can drive the car down the line and you can follow the line and pretend the car is driving. So in this case now I'm going to be drifting around at that point there, so I can hold that line roughly where the guide is with the back end out in a nice drift, and that is where the car is going to be. Come to about here, it'll start to straighten up, and I'll go back into the bends there, and again we can see we're just about missing the wall over there, and as it's drifting round we're missing the wall over this side as well, and we'll come round and then it starts off again. So we know we're right for the car. We'll just double check. 5.5 inches, 5.5 inches, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. So I now know that all my markings out are completely even, and this is exactly where I want my slot to go. So really all this is 2 bends and 2 straights, about as simple as it gets. So now what I'll do is I'll put a drill in these holes, and I'll pilot hole these drills ready to take a screw. Okay, so here is our radius bar with a hole in it, and here is a screw that fits it nicely with very little movement. So the pilot hole for this drill is 3.5 mil. So I'm going to drill a 3.5 mil hole. And yes, I am sacrificing my workbench for you guys, so a bit of appreciation in the old subscriber department. So there's a hole in there for our radius. And there's another hole for our radius. So that's all we need to do for that. So next, we just need to screw the radius arm into that hole there. Like that. You don't want to go too far down, because obviously this radius arm is hovering above the surface because the hole isn't flat to the bottom. So next, put your router on the radius arm and just jiggle it around. There, you might need to just undo it a bit more. There we are. Right, and then we want to come in to there. You want to get the height of the screw so it's reasonably nice to the top of that radius arm. There, so that's nice. So now what we got is we got that. So next thing, set your router to its highest position, and then line up your cutter with the hole. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually bring this camera down now, and I'm going to take a different angle so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I've repositioned this camera to hopefully give you a better view. So you can now see the radius bar screwed in with a decent gap. It's not free to move up and down particularly, but the router is free to slide along its length. You can see the curve, and you can see our start and stop points. So what we want to do now is move the router so that the cutter is lining up with the radius. This is not wildly important. So all you do then is just slacken off the router, bring the cutter down so you can double check the line and make sure that the router is on the line. Like I say, it's not wildly important. You do have a little bit of wiggle room. Once you're happy that the cutter is on the line and you're happy with where it is, you want to do up that nut there to lock off the radius arm. As you can see now, it's all locked off and it can't go anywhere. You can slacken off the router and lift it away again. That is now completely locked in. This router cannot do anything other than cut that radius. It can't go anywhere. You're utterly safe. Like I said, anybody can do this. This is not difficult because the router is now locked in. It can't do anything but route a circle. So with our depth stop set to our shallowest setting, you want to start the router up, drop the router down to that setting, lock it off, and then start your cut from here and finish over there. Because the router is locked in on this screw, it doesn't really matter where you start. You can please yourself. As long as you start or stop at that line there, start and stop at that line there. And you want to go right in the middle of it. So they want to go 50% over because you want the actual stop point to be on the X, center for center. Don't stop short, otherwise it makes this bend a bit difficult. So I'm going to do it in real time so you can actually see how fast I'm doing it. So bear with me, we'll do 3 passes and we'll start and stop here and you'll see. So here we go. Okay, so here is our car, there is our slot, and there is a slot car track. Perfect. And that really isn't difficult. Look, there we go. Look, we got a nice stop over there. Actually, let me just move you slightly. There you go. You can see now that's just about missing. And you've got a really good drift. And there you are. That is it. So that is as easy as doing a rounded cutter. So let me just do the other side now. And I'll bring you over here a moment. Sorry, that's not very professional, I know, but whatever, we'll give it a go. So we'll just do this one now from round there to round there. So we've got exactly the same as this side. And I'll come back to you then and I'll show you how to join them up. Okay, so back to the modelling bench, because now I want to explain to you how the router works and our next step. So up till now, we've just routed radius arm bends. Now I am aware that there are other ways to route slots with templates and following off the other groove and following on the edge of the track and all the rest of it. I am actually a time-served cabinet maker, so I do know all about the routing techniques, but this is for beginners, so I want to take it baby steps and explain to the beginners exactly how it's done easily. Complicated options are out there, but this video is not about those. So cut all your radiuses first with your radius arm, because it's easy to join up your curves with a straight line. It's very difficult to join a bend onto a straight because it's a lot more setting up and a lot more faffing about. So it's easier to cut the bends first and then join up the bends with a straight. So how a router works. So you'll notice that the router has got a rounded side on it. That rounded side is directly radiusing around the center of that cutter. So no matter where you go on the edge of this router, you won't come off the center of the cutter. Whereas if you try and run off the side of the router on this flat side here, you can come off of it like that and you'll be pulling that cutter all over the place. So don't run a straight edge off this straight edge, run a straight edge off of this rounded side here, because no matter where you go on there, you will still be routing a straight line because it's running off the center of the cutter. So with that said, let me explain to you how the cutter actually works with this drawing here. So this is your cutter here on your router, and your cutter is turning in a clockwise direction. So what we want to be doing, if this is the edge of your router, let's pretend, and this is your straight edge that you've clamped to your work, this bit here. So as the cutter comes, and you've just cut your groove back there. So this is now free space. So as the cutter comes around into the free space, it's not pulling the router at all. But as it comes up to here, it's actually cutting into fresh wood. So every action has an opposite and equal reaction and so on and so forth. So as the cutter comes around here and starts pushing into the wood, it wants to push the back of the router in the opposite direction, in this case straight into our straight edge, which is exactly what we want. So the cutter of your router always turns clockwise, so you always put your straight edge that you want to follow on this side of the router and run in this direction, so that the router is always cutting at 9 o'clock. So obviously you would actually run it from there, so it would always be cutting like that, cutting at 9 o'clock over here and leaving your groove behind you over here. Always put this fence on the side where the cutter is pushing, relevant to this drawing here. If you put your fence on the opposite side of where I'm telling you to put it, what will happen is you'll be cutting and the cutter will want to pull away from the actual work, and you'll have to push the router physically into that straight edge and keep the router tight against it, because the router will always want to be pulling away. But if you keep the fence on this side with the cutter cutting at 9 o'clock there, it'll always push in, and you can basically just walk the router along and it won't do anything but cut a nice straight line pushing against your backstop on here. Right, so with that said, let's go back to the table and then route those two straight lines. Okay, so how to join up these two circles. Very straightforward. Like I said, keep the straight edge on this side of the router, so the cutter is cutting at 9 o'clock, and put it on the radius side. Now this is no way to treat your spirit level, but it's nice and yellow and you can see it, as opposed to the piece of wood I was going to use, which is blending into the area. So what you do is you set your guide or your depth stop to about halfway, and then you drop your router down to that halfway point. So it's now in the groove, and you find the exact point where the end of that cutter last cut this groove. So you can just rotate that cutter, and it's not actually touching anything but nothing, just it's spinning freely in that groove. It's not bouncing off the wood or anything, and it's perfectly at the end of that last cut. And just keep turning it until it's perfect, which it is right there. So then what you can do to help yourself out, you just touch the fence up against the router and make a mark just about there, like that, so you got a reference. Then pick your router up, and your router is unplugged at this stage because you don't want to be messing around with the cutter while it's doing this, and do exactly the same on this end as well. So just rotate the cutter gently and just feel for the edge of that wood, and I can just feel it about there. Then bring up your straight edge and just make a gentle mark, and then line up those two marks, leave the router there and line up the straight edge on the first mark you made, and then just gently clamp your straight edge, in this case my poor unsuspecting spirit level. So just clamp him down. Just move over to the edge of the bench like that, so a bit more there. Right, so there you go. So just clamp him down gently, not too gently, on this end. Like that. Right, so now we've got this clamped to the board. And then what we could do then is take the router back out, go back to over here, and just double check and make sure that it's exactly right. Now I can feel that this straight edge needs to go that way just a hair, so I can slacken off this one, move it just a whisker, and then come back and double check it's a little bit too much. Just come back and adjust it back again the other way, and reposition it, and then double check again. So maybe a little bit more. Do it again. There, that's perfect. Right there, I can spin that cutter. It's not touching anything, so I know this side is right. And then come back to the first one or the last one, whichever way you look at it. Turn it again, double have a feel. It's walking a little bit, so I want to move it in a bit more. We're talking fractions now, absolutely fractions. Nip it up again. And try it. Now that's a little bit too far. And just keep going back and forth like this until you get both sides, both ends of the cut, so that you can turn your router without actually touching the side of the groove at all. So I'm just going to pull away now. I'm going to mess around and then we'll come back. Okay, so I've got it about spot on now. So if I put the router in that groove there and spin the cutter, I can feel nothing there. When I put the router in this end here, I can feel nothing there. So I'm now ready to make my cut. So now slacken off the router, put it back to our first cut settings, and then make 3 passes up against the straight edge on our rounded edge there. Just come from there to here, making sure that we always cut in this direction. So let's do that. And there you are. You have the two circles joined up absolutely perfectly, and you can see in the camera every single line is absolutely lined up perfectly. It's just a case of taking your time, making sure that this straight edge is perfect and you can't feel any resistance on the cutter before you make the cut. And you take 1/3 pass, lift up the cutter, come back to the beginning on the line. Never go beyond the line because your curve starts right on that mark. So you always want to start on the mark and finish on the mark exactly. And you can always go in there with a little bit of sandpaper if you're a little bit short. But if you go a little bit long, you'll make a little divot in the outside of your bend, and the guide runs on the outside of the bend. So that's really important not to overshoot that mark, because you'll get a little dink in the beginning of that bend right where the guide is going to register. So you don't want to do that. So take 3 passes each time. Always come from this direction and then lift up the cutter, come back to the start, lower it, and then go back again until you get your depth. Right, so that's this side done. I'm going to quickly go into fast forward and we'll get the other side done. And there you are, a fully routed MDF slot car track, albeit very simple and very small. And it's very, very easy to do, as you've just seen. And all we've done is we've used 2 bends on a standard radius arm, and we've cut 2 straights on a straight edge. Nothing more difficult than that. Now obviously you can make a much bigger track, you can use much bigger bends, you can have bends that go from one tightness to another tightness just by adding on a second curve. You can do all sorts of things with it, but that is the basic essence of how to route a slot in a board. It really isn't difficult if you just want to use a radius arm and straight lines. It's really that simple, and as you can see, all the lines are all lining up perfectly. And if you put the car in the groove, you can see that the car is absolutely running through that slot, happy as Larry, as they say. No problems at all. Now you can set that bend as big as you want, but I've set it here because I want to see if I can get a bit of a drift on, and it would be nice if I could run bigger cars around here as well. And say this is quite a large Jaguar, and it's quite happy running around there. And with a little bit of practice, you can work out how big your bends want to be and how much drift you want on it, and so on and so forth. You can do all sorts of other things, but that is the basic essence of how to do an MDF slot car track. So what I'm going to do now in this video is I'm going to now decorate this whole board. I'll do a whole massive fast forward section now. I'll fill up these. What you do with these holes, just countersink them a little bit or dig them out a little bit to make them a little bit concave. Put a bit of car body filler in them and then just rub them over so they disappear. And then we'll paint the board white. We'll make some back scenes. We'll see how that's going in a minute. And then we'll start airbrushing this, and we'll dress this whole thing up to make this track look really cool. Again, you could do a lot more with this, and I wanted to do it a lot more with this, but we needed to keep it simple for this video. But you'll see now what an interesting little diorama you can have with such a basic little board. You could have all sorts of things. You could have it coming around the edge, and you could have it dipping in, and you could have more crossovers and all the rest of it. But that isn't the subject of this video. So let's crack on. Let's go on to fast forward now, get these holes filled, get this painted, make the back scene, and create this whole layout. And you can see what a cool little track you can make with a really basic little circuit. Did you enjoy that? That was awesome fun to record. I was almost going to do it under ordinary daylight, but I thought, no, turn the lights off. It's got to be done in the dark with the lights shining off the fascias, off all the smoke and everything else. I thought it was really quite fun. Anyway, I hope you've now seen what fun you can have from a really small track. And also, if you didn't know how to route a slot, you've now got a very good understanding on how to do that as well. And maybe you'll find the motivation to go and route that slot and make yourself a really cool slot track. And if you don't want to do it, on my website, I'm now offering that service on small boards, so keep the cost down. And also, don't forget, I'm now selling these fascias on there as well, in case you fancied a row of garages. So, I hope that you found this content interesting, and if you have, maybe you'll subscribe. And if you could hit the little bell button, that would also be awesome. So, until the next time, thank you very much.